welcome to part 2 of Module 1. Primarily in this video, we'll be talking about the installation planning process and post-installation of Server 2019. With that, it's important to do some advanced planning to make sure that all of the hardware and software needs are going to be met for the current requirements, as well as any potential expanding of the need and demand on the server. So with that, there are some minimum requirements as far as hardware and storage and things like that with the server operating system. Those are very minimal in terms of what you would actually likely need to have for a server, and we'll go over some of those. But with that, try to make sure that you exceed those requirements and exceed what you currently need right now, because there will likely be some need to expand some of those resources further down the road, and it would be a lot easier to plan accordingly for that. Some of the other items that you might want to plan and make sure that you are thinking through all the scenarios are if you're going to use some type of RAID for redundancy. Most enterprise level servers have a integrated or separate additional RAID card to have some additional functionality, but that is potentially another configuration that you'll have to look at, as well as any additional hard drives and other needs for future expansion. So with the Server 2019, there are some basic requirements. These are very minimal and would likely need to be much better hardware requirements than these to have a production server. But some of them are listed here with the BIOS settings. It's definitely recommended to have a TPM or Trusted Platform Module, as the full name is on that. That's going to allow secure boot as well as full disk encryption with BitLocker. So that is a hardware piece that you're going to want to make sure that you implement and have included in the hardware up front. There are some processor requirements. Again, these are very, very low for running a server. Likewise, with the half a gig of memory that's required, likely you're going to have a significantly larger amount than that, as well as the 32 gig requirement for storage. However, those lighter requirements do make it very feasible to install as a lightweight virtual machine on just about any modern computer, to where you can test out the software and kind of learn it and test some of the functionality without using a lot of resources. Some of the other requirements are a network card that is PXE enabled, which all modern network cards are. That's going to allow network boot and things like that. Optional hard drive, or optical drive, such as a DVD, is optional. Some display requirements there, as well as you're going to obviously need a keyboard and mouse if it is a physical machine. Otherwise, you're going to use the integrated or external devices you're already using if it is a virtual machine. So we will look a little bit into the installation process here. I do have an additional video that covers installing Windows Server as a VM using VirtualBox. So some of these items I'm not going to spend a lot of time on, but with the installation process, you can break it into three separate simple tasks, which is obtaining the installation media. For the use of this class, it's downloading the Windows Server 2019 Evaluation Edition, which I will provide a link elsewhere in the course. Starting the installation process as well as completing it. And then there are some post configurations that we'll need to look at. With that, there's a couple ways that you can go about installing the operating system depending on how you're installing it. If you are installing it on a physical machine, you would likely need to install that off of a bootable DVD or USB. There's a number of tools out there that are free to assist with creating these types of images. Burnaware or Rufus is a very common one. Within the operating system, most operating systems should be able to take an ISO file, burn that to a DVD as a bootable DVD, or you can use one of these applications to create a bootable USB drive. If you're installing it as a virtual machine, you should be able to just use the ISO file, which is how my other video explains the process with VirtualBox. It is important to download the correct version or edition of the server OS. There are different versions out there. For this course and all of what we use in it, we use the evaluation edition, which has all of the different editions included in it, and we'll talk about that a little bit further on in this. Some of the other pieces that will be important to make sure that you have set up, especially if you're installing it on a physical machine and not a virtual machine, is making sure that the boot order is in the correct order for how you want to boot into the installation media. By default, most systems are going to be set to boot to the hard drive with their operating system installed on it. Most operating systems and hardware will allow you to change that boot order as the system's booting up using one of the function keys, depending on what type of manufacturer you're looking at. But most of those are like an F9 or an F12 that'll allow you to select a boot option. Otherwise, you'll want to go into the BIOS settings and change that boot order to reflect if you're going to install off of a USB or a DVD and etc. However, for this course, we install as virtual machines using VirtualBox, so you will not have to change anything with the boot order. Again, all of that is covered in a separate video with the setup of VirtualBox. Looking at that, some of the steps that you'll take to complete the process are selecting your regional settings and keyboard settings, such as time zone, what country you're in, what language you'd like to have it in, and things along those lines. If you had purchased a license for a production server, that would be a step in the installation process. However, for the evaluation edition that we use, we do not have a license that we have to worry about. That is an important step to make sure that you are not using an unattended installation setup within VirtualBox. Otherwise, that will fail. Again, that's covered in a separate video. Some of the other options that you have, I will kind of discuss as we go through these screenshots. This is the first step where you're going to select your language and keyboard settings for how you want Windows installed. On this screen, you're going to hit the Install Now button. The only other option here is to use the Repair Your Computer, which would be an option if you had a current version of Windows Server already on there that maybe was having some issues and you're trying to repair or otherwise. Here are the available additions on this installation screen here. You can see that we have 4 additions. 2 of those are standard and 2 are data center. You might notice that 2 of those also have desktop experience. Those are going to include the full desktop environment that most of you are used to using, whereas the ones that do not indicate desktop experience are going to be a server core edition where you do not have a desktop to work with, only a command line. So I always recommend for this course going with the data center desktop experience. Not only will that give you the desktop environment to work in and the graphical user interface, but it's also going to give you all of the features available in the server OS. This obviously in production, if you're buying a license, would be a more expensive license because you do get additional features with the data center. This next screen is the 2 options you have for upgrading a current operating system, which would be an example on this. If you were going, say, from server 2016, and you already had it on the system, but you wanted to do an in-place upgrade to 2019 and maintain all of your files and applications and settings. For a new installation where you're not worried about wiping what is already on the system, you would use a custom install, which is what we would use for this course to install a new virtual machine. And the next screen is going to be the selection of what hard drive and or partition that you want to install the operating system on. On a new virtual machine, you're going to see a similar selection as this, where you only have one drive and one partition available. So you can just proceed to next on this screen to create the new virtual machine. If, however, you had a system that had multiple hard drives or partitions on those hard drives, it would be important to make sure that you understand which one of those is going to be used to install the operating system, because this process will essentially overwrite anything on the hard drive that you're installing. Like I said, for a virtual machine that we're doing in this course, it's not really important. You should see only the one drive, and that is a virtual drive within your drive. So you basically are segmenting a small portion of your system's hard drive when you set up the virtual machine, and that's what you're selecting. So as long as you're doing this process within VirtualBox, you're not going to overwrite any files on your host system. One of the processes that as you do the installation, you do have to set a administrative password for the administrator account. For use in a lab or testing environment, it's not really important to have a overly secure password. In a production environment, it would obviously be very important to have a secure password. But for testing and classwork, I recommend using the same password for your virtual machines, because there will be multiple steps throughout the course where you are setting up additional passwords, and it'll just make life a lot easier if you use the same one within this course for your virtual machines. And then you'll be prompted to log into the virtual machine, or if you're doing it on a physical machine. And then we'll move over to some of the post configurations for server OS. So there are several of them that will be automatically set during the install process that you essentially won't have to worry about for classwork. However, in a production environment, there would be a number of them that are significantly important. Time zone will likely get set automatically, but you do have the option to go in, change the time zone, make the operating system update the time automatically, and things like that. So when you have a time change, you don't have to worry about any of the manual configurations. Other items, you might have to configure the IP address. Again, in a production environment, servers typically have static IP address assignment, or make use of DHCP reservations. So they always get the same IP address. That's not overly important for what you'll be using in this course. However, it is important to be able to go into the system settings and identify what IP settings the system is getting, and to be able to identify those. Additionally, you might want to change the firewall settings. Definitely in a production environment. Again, in this course, you should not have to make any firewall changes unless you are including that in later assignments that call that out. Other pieces of information, definitely important to understand the computer name and how to change that. That is a setting within Windows settings. It's important to know that when you install a virtual machine, the virtual software, such as VirtualBox, may have a name associated with the virtual machine. However, that is not necessarily the computer name once you are within the operating system. So it's important to be able to identify those and understand how they work, which we'll also talk about further down in the course, as well as domain membership, which we'll be working a lot with later on in the course. Another option that might be of use is installing a modern web browser. All Windows operating systems, desktop or server desktop environments, they have a built-in web browser included, depending on what version you have. So you'll probably see something like Internet Explorer or Edge, again, depending on the version of the operating system. We don't have to worry about activating the operating system in a production environment, that would be an important step to take. Some of the settings can be configured in a number of locations. Many of you have probably worked with Windows before, either desktop or server OSs. A lot of settings can be set, like I said, a number of locations. Within the server OS, a lot of the settings and things that we'll be looking at can be located within Server Manager, which starts up by default when you boot up the server. So some of those things that you might want to take a look at are the time zone and, again, the name of the server and things like that. So that will move us into some of the networking portion of this module to wrap up the rest of it. In terms of how you want to set up networking for your virtual machines, you should be able to use just allow DHCP to assign the IP settings for you. However, in a production environment, like I said, it would be steps that you would either manually configure or have set up with something along the lines of a DHCP reservation, where every time the system boots up, it gets the correct information. With some of the pieces that we're going to look at in a production environment, like any other computing system, you are going to need a network card, the correct protocols running on the system, as well as a router and other network devices to allow those. The three default protocols are going to be TCP over IP, UDP IP, and ICMP, which ICMP is one that most of us are familiar with in terms of using the ping command. One of the differences, or the main difference between TCP and UDP is TCP is a connection-oriented protocol, meaning that it ensures the transmission of packets, and if for some reason those packets are lost over the network, within that protocol, it has means to identify that and require retransmission of the lost data. With UDP, it is not connection oriented, and if packets are lost in transmission, they are lost forever. Some of the different types of communications rely on different protocols. So you can think of anything that's going to require to have that connection verified along the way typically uses TCP. So a good example of that, if you're using a remote access protocol such as remote desktop or SSH, those are protocols that are going to be used with TCP because they require that back and forth communication, and they need to know that everything is received. Whereas UDP is often used with protocols that are more reliant on getting the data to the destination is quick and efficient as possible. So good examples of that would be live video or audio, so like phone calls or video chats, where it's more important to get the data there as quick and timely as possible, whereas it's not as important if packets were lost along the way. Good example of that, if you're talking to someone over the phone using UDP and packets are lost, it's not going to make a whole lot of sense to reconstruct part of the conversation after the fact. It likely be more efficient just to be able to get that information there as quick as possible. And if there is loss, go back and kind of reiterate that something was lost along the way. We're all familiar with, sorry, you were breaking up. Can you repeat what you were saying? So those are some examples of that. Next, we will look a little bit at IPv4 and IPv6 addressing. Most of us are fairly familiar with IPv4, and IPv6 is kind of been lingering on the forefront for a while now. A number of pieces of information or technology have been able to allow us to continue using IPv4, such as network address translation and port address translation, to allow us to utilize the number of IP addresses that we have in the version 4. Again, for this course, in terms of VMs, I would probably recommend going with just using DHCP. It's really your choice to use IPv4 or 6. Generally speaking, a lot of people are still using IPv4, so that would probably be the easier route to work in this course, but you are more than welcome to use either. With that, a system does require a valid IPv4 address, as well as a subnet mask to identify which portion of the address is for the network and which is going to be identified as host portions. Another piece is a default gateway, which is going to be required to communicate outside of your local network. Again, a lot of these settings are handled within VirtualBox for what we'll be doing, and we won't have to go too far into those pieces. Another piece of information here is unicast communications, which is a one-to-one communication over a network. There are some other types of communication, such as multicast, that we'll be looking at later on in the course. The IPv4 addressing uses octets, which divide the IP address into 4 distinct octets, and we'll look at that here in a second. Depending on your subnet mask that you're using and how the network's divided, which we'll look on the illustration on the next slide, will help you identify which portion is network and which portion is the host ID portion of that. So taking a look at that, this is looking at a Class B subnet or subnet and IP address. What I mean by a Class B is basically identifying how many octets are for the network portion and how many are for the host portion. Basically, a Class A subnet is going to use the first octet, so the first 8 bits of the binary portion of the address. So in this illustration, we have the decimal value of 144 for the IP address on the first octet. And then the binary representation of that is 100, 1 followed by 4 zeros, identifying that that IP portion. So that is the first octet. And you can see the second octet is the 58 portion, or 00111010 in binary. This IP address here, like I said, is using a class B. So the first two octets, so the 144.58 portion of the address is going to be used for the network. So that portion of the IP address is going to be the same for any host on this segment, whereas the .0.1 of the address is going to be assigned to the host, and that would change for each device on the local segment. Looking at the subnet mask of that, we've got 255.255 and then .0.0. The 255.255 is identifying the network portion of the address. That is going to be used to basically say the first two octets of the IP addresses are going to be assigned to the network. The last two are going to be assigned to any host on the network. A little bit further on, different classes of subnets. Like I said earlier, class A subnet is going to be using the first octet. A class B subnet is going to be using the first two octets for the network portion. And if we were to go into a class C subnet, then the first three octets are going to be used for the network portion, and only the last octet would be used for the host portion. So, and moving on to IPv6, there are a number of things that have changed. It goes from IPv4 being a 32-bit value, which we saw in the previous slide, to a 128-bit value, and it's broken up into 8 delimited hexadecimal values. So instead of using binary values, we're going to be using hexadecimal values. And how a hexadecimal system works, you have the numbers 0 through 9. Those are all going to represent the same value as they would as you're used to. So 1 equals 1, 2 equals 2, and so on. However, once you get past that, you can also use up to 15 characters, adding in the alphabet, a couple letters of the alphabet. So instead of using 2 digits on like the number 10, you're going to use A for that. And instead of using 11, you're going to use B, and so on. So there are, like I said, there are a handful of things that have changed. The use of IPv6 allows for a significantly larger number of usable and routable IP addresses over the network. There are a number of functionality to use IPv6 and IPv4 together, such as Teredo, which allows IPv and IPv6 to work together. And then we already talked a little bit about NAT and PAT with the Network Address Translation Protocol. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of the different IP settings that we'll be using and looking at in the course. First being automatic settings from Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol, or DHCP. That is going to reach out to the DHCP server as a computer starts up and request things like an IP address, default gateway, subnet mask, and some other information like DNS server. For this course, most VMs should be able to utilize that, like I said. The alternative would be static assignment, or if you're using some type of DHCP reservations, which are beyond the scope of this course in terms of configuring those. Some of the other things that we'll be talking about are a PIPA, or automatic private IP addressing. Essentially, what that does is it's a feature for Windows when it boots up. If it does not have a static assignment and it cannot reach a DHCP server for some reason, the system will identify a self-assigned IP address, and that's going to start with a 169 address. So that's a good indicator that for some reason you are not reaching your DHCP server. All of those settings can be found under Server Manager in one area or another. Next piece we're going to look at are some of the firewall configurations that you might be using in a production environment. A DMZ is a good example of how you might logically and physically locate a server. And what a DMZ does is has a segmented portion of the network where you might have a specific device like a web server or other resource that typically allows outside connections over the internet, but also allows internal connections into it. So web servers are a good example that are often used in a DMZ for that particular reason. So some of the other configurations that we talked about, and we'll talk a little bit more about here, are changing the server name and some of the local settings within the server. You can do that within Server Manager and then select the local server on the left-hand side of Server Manager. And then there's a number of items like the name and if a server's on a domain along those lines that can be changed there. Other pieces that might be important to take a look at, like I had mentioned, you're likely going to have Windows included Internet Explorer, which is a legacy application that's no longer supported. That's kind of a built-in piece for a lot of the server operating systems. So it is likely that you'll want to go out and get a new web browser and install that. One of the important pieces to that is the Internet Explorer Enhanced Security Configuration, which basically blocks all outbound going connections over a web browser unless you specifically select that you want each of those allowed. So you do have the option within Server Manager on the local server setting to disable that feature, which would allow you to go out and download another web browser and get to that to install it. Couple pieces with the installation process. Again, we won't need to worry about installing the license key for the evaluation edition that we're going to look at. But with that, there are some different ways that you can license it. You can manually license using a license key. Most larger organizations purchase a multiple activation key, or a NAC, which allows for multiple devices to be activated using the same key. a lot of times that is pushed out over the domain and using something along the lines of a key management service. So a lot of times that is the way that the activation is pushed out. And then looking at some of the other pieces we will talk about. There are some hands-on pieces that are available within the textbook. However, what we are going to do is focus on the assignments within the course and refer to the syllabus for those course assignments and due dates. And that will end the Module 1 video. Thank you for watching. Please let me know if you have any questions.